Hello and welcome. In a landmark judgment this week, a 5-judge bench said it can do away with the 6-month waiting period while granting a divorce. This means a divorce can be granted without having to send the couple to family court, where there's usually a requirement to wait for 6 to 18 months. It's also said that it can rule on a case even when one of the parties isn't agreeable to a divorce. Now, this is a departure from the norm because, as per Section 13B of the Hindu Marriage Act, there is a 6-month waiting period required after the first application for divorce is filed in cases of mutual consent, so that both sides have a chance to reconcile their differences if possible, and so that both sides can be sure of their decision. This is also a benchmark judgment because the apex court said that the waiting period can be done away with in the case of an, quote, irretrievable breakdown of marriage. Now, this is unprecedented because under the Hindu Marriage Act of 1955, there has to be grounds for granting a divorce or for filing a divorce. So, if you file for divorce, you can do so on the grounds of cruelty, your partner has a disease, has deserted you. But irretrievable breakdown of marriage was not a ground, was not one of these grounds. So, what is irretrievable breakdown of marriage? What are the grounds for an irretrievable breakdown of marriage? Can couples move the Supreme Court for divorce now? What exactly does this new verdict change? Let's do a deep dive on We the People. So, the big takeaway, one would say, the clear, obvious positive here is that the Supreme Court's latest ruling on divorce brings hope for those who are stuck in unhealthy marriages, meandering, unhappy marriages, right? Let's bring in Ria Ramji. Ria, you're a third time, thank you for joining us on We the People. You're a third time divorce petitioner. You first filed for divorce over 10 years ago, and you clearly, I'm sure you feel like you've already spent enough time on this. You are done. You're ready to turn this chapter. What's your reaction to this court ruling?
It's a big relief if it actually translates on the ground. And of course, we have to take into account the fact that our judicial system already has a lot of delays.
Yeah.
You could get your first hearing and then the next date could anyway be after 4 to 5 months. And if for whatever reason, the registrar is not there, the judge is not there, there's no electricity sometimes in a courtroom, the network isn't working, their servers are down, then you get another date.
So the 6-month
another 3 to 4 months.
Over and above this, what we know of a judicial system is just like rubbing, spice on your wounds, is what you're saying. Understood.
Exactly.
The fact
and
that
then,
sorry, go ahead.
Then you have the additional problem of the fact that if you have children in the marriage, they are also getting shunted between the fact that, a lot of people try and safeguard the children from that whole thing of animosity between the parents.
Yes.
But if you have to give grounds. And of course, that's going to create animosity because it is a blame game then.
So this is fascinating. What you're pointing out here is that the apex court has, for the first time, paved the way for couples to be able to seek separation without assigning fault, without having to prove that one of you are a villain, without having to say things like, my child's father or my child's mother has been cruel to me, or proving adultery.
Yeah. Because quite honestly, especially if you've been in a marriage for a while, you have a relationship not just with your husband, but with his family, you have common friends, and then you're forcing people to take sides. You're not just saying there's a breakdown of the marriage between two people. You're essentially saying, I'm going to break off with that entire part of my life because there is no other choice. You're forcing people to take sides when you shouldn't have to.
Okay, so you're saying the system, there's something basically wrong with the system, and for the first time, the court acknowledges the reality that sometimes people can just fall out of love. They sometimes just cannot coexist harmoniously for no fault of their own. I mean, 10 years into a marriage, maybe you just aren't happy. And that's okay according to you.
The UK legal system has just about 6 months ago come up with a concept called the no-fault divorce, where you actually don't have to assign blame at all. like
So-
you can get married just because you want to spend the rest of your life with somebody on that particular day. They accept the fact that tomorrow you don't want to spend the rest of your life with that person anymore.
So you're saying, do you believe that this court hearing, we're not sure whether it will transfer down to the ground, but you believe, correct me if I'm wrong, if I can put words in your mouth, that this reflects the reality of the society and times we live in a little more?
Way more. I think it's a huge step in the right direction. I think it's a huge step in creating healthy spaces for children of parents who are no longer together. And I think it's a very empowering space for single parents.
Okay. Now, I just want to say one thing. The court was referring to cases where the husband and wife have lived separately for years, where they've engaged in protracted litigation. They've reached a point where reconciliation is no longer an option, and you would be a fit case, Ria. You first filed for divorce over 10 years ago. You've tried to file in London, in India, and you haven't lived together for over 3 years now. But let's bring in Mumbai-based lawyer Mrinalini Deshmukh, who specializes in matrimonial and divorce cases. I just want to ask you first about Ria. Ria's got me thinking, what are the dangers of not having the option of having an amicable divorce? Where, like she says, one partner doesn't have to be a villain. Divorce settlements are anyway complicated matters. The court even underlined in its judgment that sometimes it can be of criminal nature also. What do you know? Can you give us examples of, the extreme lengths cases have gone, or lawyers have advised their clients, perhaps, I don't know, I'm just guessing, to say there was dowry involved, or cruelty, or cheating, or domestic violence? Have you heard of cases like this?
Good evening. At the outset, I think I should start by saying that applaud the fact that it's a landmark judgment, and it has really to a large extent put an end to some of the bitter divorces that have gone on for years and resulted into a lot of this issue. I have dealt with a lot of cases where, or I would not say a lot, but quite a few cases where the parties have been struggling for divorce for nearly 12 to 13 years. Now, when you talk about 12 to 13 years, we are talking over a decade or two. And this is surely a very large period for people to be battling for divorce.
Yes.
That is the reason why, as the earlier panelist also said, that one of the things that the courts should also consider is not only an irretrievable breakdown of marriage at the Supreme Court level, but I think it should be also the duty of the legislation to consider what the courts have held in its order and definitely consider using that as a ground for divorce in a contested matters.
No,
Today,
but why
a
do you say
breakdown
you
of
should
marriage.
hope? Mrinalini, let me ask you, because Ria started off by saying this is great and she's all for it if it actually sees an impact on the ground, if it actually affects cases. Why do you say it won't? Should it not be the case if the Supreme Court says something, it actually peters down to the everyday courts?
No. So I think that's where you need to understand the Supreme Court judgment. The Supreme Court judgment talks about it when matters come before the Supreme Court. That is, they travel from the lower court to the High Court and High Court to the Supreme Court. I'll give you one example. In one of the cases that I had dealt with, we had filed on the grounds of mental cruelty on behalf of the husband. The marriage lasted for nearly 2 years or 3 years. The parties were litigating for nearly 18 years. Believe you me, 18 years. And at that point of time, talking about a case 10 years back, the Supreme Court, when we went to the Supreme Court and said we want divorce on the grounds of cruelty because the wife is not agreeing for it, the Supreme Court said, I'm sorry, we understand there is 18 years of separation, but we feel that there is no cruelty culled out in your petition, as a result of which the husband will not get the divorce. So even at that stage, the Supreme Court did not grant divorce. This new judgment is not saying that you can use the irretrievable breakdown of marriage as a ground for divorce in the lower court. It is a power given to the Supreme Court under Article 142 of the Constitution, that is the inherent jurisdiction of the Constitution, to have the powers to dissolve the marriage. So once the matters travel to the Supreme Court, if one party wants a divorce, the other party is still saying, no, I don't want a divorce, then the Supreme Court will then step in and say, now with this constitutional bench judgment, I hereby declare that this marriage is over for the various grounds that has been put in.
Okay. Now
so that is what it is.
Mrinalini Deshmukh has given us a reality check here on We the People. And I'm so glad, because I think it's our job to make sure the public knows. Perhaps it's too early to rejoice. Because let's get in Sheetal Nagar here. Sheetal has been struggling to get a divorce. Sheetal, you've been in a bad marriage. I'm just going to give the audience a quick summation of your story. She's been married since 2016, correct?
Yes,
acrimonious divorce. You have claimed dowry harassment. You've claimed mental torture. You've been away from your husband for 5 years, but he's not granting you a divorce.
Yes, ma'am.
What was your reaction when you heard the Supreme Court ruling? And what is your reaction when you hear Mrinalini saying that things may not change for you right now?
See, previous to that, as you told me, that what Mrinalini ma'am said. What Mrinalini ma'am said is the truth of the judgment. That is, even if, without that also, what Supreme Court says and what is being followed at district level is totally different. There are two Indias. There is one is rural India and one where we are living in Delhi. So how it is going to affect? Actually, where there are various district courts which are, you can say कि इस type का Supreme Court का judgment है, they are not going to follow that. Whether you can say in bail matters also, Supreme Court has been reiterating that so, district level judges be sent for training again if they are not following the guidelines. I guess same should be done for these matters.
So, आपके case में क्या हो रहा है? Why is your husband dragging his feet?
It is just the same manner what Mrinalini ma'am said. It is dragging the case on purpose. See, biological clock of a female is a tickling point. That is the point where male counterparts actually blackmail her. See, we are going to drag the litigations as far as we can and you won't get a divorce. In that scenario, this case will come as a help. This is where this comes into play. You can go to the Supreme Court after the lower court or the high court and you can ask, see,
but
this man is
it probably takes more than 6 months. So, in the end, it's nullified, is it? Deepika Pushkar Nath, come in over here, a family law advocate, a human rights activist. And also, you know, what of cases where divorce has not been filed by mutual consent? What happens there? If you have one party who doesn't want to do this, do we need to exercise caution? You know, I think it's great for those who want to opt out of an unfulfilling, emotionally dead marriage, right? But what if you have a couple living separately for years, but you know, let's say the wife wants the marriage to continue because she doesn't want to live with the stigma of being a divorcee. That for her outweighs being in a bad marriage. I'm not condoning, you know, fear of social stigma, but that is the reality sometimes of the India that we live in. Deepika Pushkar Nath. All right, we don't have Deepika yet. Anil Murthy joins us. He's the founder of the Save Indian, the Family Foundation. Anil, if you could just either respond to my question and also just tell me your overall reaction to this. Is this a sensitive, nuanced judgment? Is it inappropriate in an Indian context? What do you think?
Well, about no-fault divorce, I would like to say that this is not something new. There is debate in the parliament around 10 years back, 10, 12 years back, and a bill was also passed in the Rajya Sabha. So, but before I go there, I would like to say we need to look at the elephant in the room. Okay, when we don't look at that, then, you know, these judgments will not help us. The biggest thing during these divorce cases or separations and all, the main thing in Indian context is money. Money is a huge thing, and divorces can be very, very expensive, especially if right now I want to talk on behalf of younger people, like say people like men or women who are like married for 2-3 years. So in such a case, divorce becomes extremely complicated and very, very expensive. Okay,
Yeah.
for example, let's say a young man, young professional man, if he wants a quick divorce, then it can cost as much as, the offer can be like, it can be like 5 to 6 years of his total income.
Yeah.
Okay, now let me go back to the parliament issue. So when the parliament was debating this, called the irretrievable breakdown of marriage in 2012 May, and then 2013 it was passed in Rajya Sabha, and it was supposed to be passed in Lok Sabha. We, the men's activists of Save Indian Family Foundation and other, we protested like anything, and we said that this doesn't take into account all the nuances of the financial and other equations and the property assets and all, and men are getting an extremely bad deal, right? See, in India, here is the problem. It's not about men versus women. Here is the
Thank
problem.
you
We
for
have a very
clarifying that.
patriarchal notion.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. We have a very patriarchal notion that if there is a divorce, a young woman is getting divorced, then her life is destroyed. Okay, so then the natural reaction to that is that, like, let the young man pay a huge amount of money to compensate for her whole life, and this is where we are pouring, oil on the fire in the court system, and then comes whole kinds of litigations on each other, and men are denying divorce and women are denying divorce, and then these things go for 7-8 years.
This is why divorces are so acrimonious, right? I'm sure maybe I don't want to go into anecdotal cases that the examples that you're raising, but for example, as Sheetal has pointed out, there's the biological clock that it's ticking for women. So women are also facing, looking at a barrel of the gun over here. But Mrinalini, please come in over here, Mrinalini Deshmukh. The fact that the Supreme Court did say that grant a divorce on this ground, albeit with great care and caution, to make sure that complete justice is done to both parties. Because here you have a panelist who's claiming that, the women are getting away with a better deal. But that's not, he talked about the fact that we live in a country like India. The fact is we are a largely poor country. There's gender discrimination is rife. Many women are still not financially independent. And the court stress on care and caution, not rushing into a quick divorce must be welcomed, I would say. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, so your question I have not understood, Sarah. Are you trying to say that when the Supreme Court says that it should be done with a lot of caution and care, now that means you have to understand the principle behind it. The principle behind it is that the law's first option or priority is to save the institution of marriage. So no law, no enactment in India is going to, propagate or canvass or support divorce. If only in those circumstances where they feel reconciliation and living together is not possible, then they will consider and give divorce on the various grounds which are available. So what the Supreme Court means is that it doesn't mean that if somebody files the courts are still given the power to ensure if they could save the institution of marriage, and only in certain cases where they feel it's impossible, they should do it. So that rests on the courts to take that kind of a decision. So I think they have not been very brash and rash about passing this.
Yeah.
At the same time, they have been very sensitive to the fact that people are languishing in these kind of situations for years and years, and turning from young people to middle-aged to otherwise.
Yeah.
And that is where they feel that this court will have inherent powers and will not anybody misuse or abuse the process. And we as the Supreme Court under 142, even if the other party is not willing, and if we are satisfied, our conscience is satisfied, all efforts have been made, will be empowered under Article 142 to dissolve the marriage under irretrievable breakdown of marriage.
Okay. Remy Kaur is a relationship counselor, cognitive behavioral therapist. She joins us from Canada. Remy, I'm sure you've taken a look at the court's judgment, findings, ruling. Could you also come in over here as what I was asking, Mrinalini? What do you think the court meant, or why did the court in its ruling also talk about complete justice being done to both parties when it talked about moving forward with great care and caution? Put that into context for us.
Thank you for having me. South Asian countries, especially India, institution of marriage is considered very sacred. When two people get into this relationship, they both want, and also their families, extended families, they both all want happily ever after. We have to understand, I would say, everyone who's involved, or people who are talking about this, we have to understand that when two adults decide to separate their ways, when they decide to, they are ready to have their divorce. So that means they have already tried everything. Yeah. So they don't want to live together. They have done everything. They may have taken the counseling. They may have involved their parents, their religious institutions, their family and friends. They must have done everything. When it comes to a point that they cannot live together, so decision has been made. In India, you don't just get up in the morning and say, you know what, I need a divorce. It takes months, it takes years sometimes. And when you look at it, it's not always one thing that leads to the divorce. It's a cluster of so many things which is happening in the relationship. So when two adults have already decided that, they cannot live together and this marriage cannot be saved, I think it's in the best interest of both the parties that this decision should be made so they both can part the ways and move on. Either if they want to move on to find another partner, if they want to move on to live a single life, whatever they want to do. Because the longer they drag, the trauma, it keeps on triggering.
Okay. Arnaz Hathiram, founder of Voice for Men's India, can I then safely say, can we all agree that the main takeaway or why this is such a significant ruling is because for the first time we're seeing the court saying that compelling a couple to be with each other against their will is a violation of their, their basic rights, that this new order, this waiting period, finally society is acknowledging that not all couples need to be convinced always that their marriage can be salvaged. And that includes men. It doesn't have to be always tilted in favor of women.
Thanks, Sarah, for the invite. So let me begin by saying I run Voice for Men India website, which particularly speaks about the misuse of laws against the men, which is very much a reality in India. Now, India is a country where we have decriminalized adultery, but for some reason, even if a marriage is dead, we consider it as sacrosanct. So at the outset, yes, I welcome the judgment from the Supreme Court wholeheartedly, because though I block for the men, I particularly feel that whether you are a man or a woman, it is absolutely inhuman for the other party to, kind of hold you from moving on in your life if the marriage is completely dead. Now, just before this judgment that we are discussing, there was another judgment which has come from the Supreme Court the previous week, which was a 2-judge bench. And the case was where the parties lived together from 1994 to 1998, just for 4 years. There were no kids. And the woman kept contesting the case for 25 long years. So in that situation, the Supreme Court actually said that this is itself is a cruelty to the husband. And, so they said, okay, irretrievable breakdown of marriage may not be a ground for divorce, but we will consider this as cruelty and strike down and dissolve this marriage, which is virtually dead. So, these are the ground realities which we cannot overlook. In this case also, despite the judgment reading that the man faced cruelty from his wife, he was actually made to pay 30 lakh alimony after 25 years of separation.
Okay,
so while
I don't want to get into an argument. I think we have enough material and I can do a whole separate show about whether laws in India are misused by men or misused by women. That is a whole separate argument. I don't want to get into that right now because that's certainly debatable. But can we agree that overall, like you said, nobody should be forced to stay in a marriage when they do not want to be there and drag this out for years and years? As Sheetal points out, she may want to move on, she may want to have kids, and that if she wants to have her own biological kids, that choice is really not up to her. She needs to act and move soon. So I want to go back, Mrinalini Deshmukh, last word to you. Very worrying if we're saying that in the end each case has to go to the Supreme Court in order for this kind of a viewpoint to be, for that decision to be taken in your case, because what's then to prevent just having a greater backlog of cases? We keep complaining about the fact that the Supreme Court has so many cases that they're trying to deal with. Are we not putting more at the door of the Supreme Court?
Exactly.
Why should this not
exactly.
filter
That's
down
exactly what
to
I'm
the
trying
lower
to
courts?
say. My view is very clear. You do not burden the Supreme Court with all these things. It's fantastic what the order is. Make a change in the legislation. This is what the parliament should do. It's a central act. Make a change in the legislation. Bring about the irretrievable breakdown of marriage as a ground for divorce at the trial court level, at the family court level. Lay down certain parameters in the legislation so that there is less ambiguity. I would not say no ambiguity. And let the lower court judges decide this on the grounds of irretrievable breakdown. You are going to do and save a lot of the time, effort, money, energy of the couple who has to travel all the way to the Supreme Court. And mind you, going from a trial court to Supreme Court can take anywhere between 9 to 10 years, considering the number of years that is spent at each stage of the court. And after 10 years, the Supreme Court deciding and granting a divorce on the breakdown of marriage. Why wait for that 10 years? Give that change. Give those rights to the trial court by virtue of bringing about a change in the legislation. That is the need of the hour. That will help people a lot, like some of them who are there on this show also, and thousands of others who are watching this. Give them that relief, and the parliament must look at this ground reality and address this issue with a lot of sensitivity and alacrity, rather than getting into some other issues which probably do not concern the families and the people, because right to get a divorce is also a part of right to life. And if right to life is a fundamental right, please, I need to lead my life in a way that will give me some freedom, some joy, and some proper and meaningful life. That's what I would like to say.
For men, women, for both genders, for both parties, everybody involved. But thank you all for joining us on this show, because I really feel we've been able to delve beyond the headlines, beyond just saying rah, superb landmark judgment, it's going to change things. But this is the reality check, and we're glad we could go into this conversation on the show, where we believe it's important to speak up, but it's also important to listen. I think I would just like to end by saying, let's remember that perhaps what this ruling is telling us, that it's a reminder that not all marriages are happy and not all divorces have to be unhappy, and settlement, not litigation, should be the preferable mode of dispute resolution in matrimonial matters, and the court's job should be to ensure that disputes are amicably resolved for everyone. Thank you all for joining us on We the People tonight.